What up?
What is up, guys? Welcome to a very special RNC Watch TV. This week we are joined by Kathy from the interwebs, who is currently out. How's the interwebs?
They're interwebbing. I do leave the condo on occasion, and this is one of those occasions. So we're trying this new thing where we use the interwebs to to record our little podcast.
Yeah, so far everything's looking good. I haven't looked at the actual file it's outputting, so thoughts and prayers. But yeah,
So because I've been gone, we haven't been able to watch as much TV together as we usually do, but we have
I've missed it.
did get to watch what?
I
I
said I've
missed it
missed it.
too. Yeah. Um, the first two or three episodes of The Gilded Age, season two.
Yeah, it's been really good so far. I'm trying to remember all the specifics. I think the last episode we watched ended on the which we I mean, if you're watching this, you know they're spoilers. But what didn't the last one end with the disgruntled previous maid like having like basically married like their next door neighbor in like their vacation home or whatever?
Yes, yes. So I don't know if you saw this part of season one. I think you did. So I don't know, I guess lady's maid. I don't know. The woman who like is Mrs. Gosh, what are their last names?
Oh god,
The new money.
Russells.
Russell.
Yeah, the Russells.
Mrs. Russell's like main woman who like dresses her and like helps her get ready and yada yada. She made a pass at Mr.
I
Russell.
remember that scene.
And yeah, so Mr. Russell was not taken in by this, not interested. And he kind of made it seem like he wasn't going to tell Mrs. Russell just because it would upset her and there was really no utility to telling her. So it was kind of an open question whether he ever actually did, but and I forgot how she stopped being employed by them, but at some point she was not employed by them anymore. So she was gone, and then she reappears at the end of the episode having married this wealthy man and essentially married her way into being a peer of Mrs. Russell. So that was
She was not
interesting.
very happy about the turn of events.
No, and it's really interesting because earlier in the show, someone refers, one of the, I don't know what you call them, but like the aristocrats, essentially, the people who, uh, old money, we'll say, the old money had referred to Mrs. Russell as like a dairy farmer's daughter or something like that, just referring to the fact that she was not old money, she was new money. And so, in a sense, like Mrs. Russell has more in common, and the fact that Mrs. Russell married her way into her class. In a way, Mrs. Russell has more in common with this maid, former maid, than the women she's trying to ingratiate herself with.
Yeah, she doesn't like being reminded of that, but yeah, and maybe that's why she has such a dislike for her is like she thinks she's like above the May, but like she's new money, so technically they're on the same level. It like I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and it's still not clear to me, and maybe I missed it, whether she knows that the maid made a pass at her husband.
Yeah, they never really explained that. Although I think she didn't she get fired because like the one like she couldn't control Miss Russell's daughter or yeah, Miss Russell's daughter,
No,
Mrs.
the
Russell's.
daughter had a different, the daughter had a governess, and the governess was a different person, I
Oh,
believe.
okay. That makes
Yeah.
sense. Yeah, okay. I don't remember why she got fired. And maybe they
Yeah. Anyway, it's interesting. I think it's really interesting too. So there's a new show called The Buccaneers. which I think is on Max too. And it's kind of like Sophia Coppola-ish telling of the real phenomenon where during a similar period, probably like very close to the Gilded Age, women who were the children, the daughters of wealthy Americans, their families would send them to England to marry the sons um of the aristocracy. And so then you have a couple who has the advantage of the title and the lineage and the breeding on the male side and the money on the female side. So, if you are a woman who comes from money, but you don't have a title, that's what the show The Gilded Age is all about, is the problems getting into society. But if you have a title, but in this period, the financial returns to land ownership, which is all these titles entitle them to, is like, okay, you're of a specific breed of person, and you have this title that is given passed down hereditarily, but financially, all you have is land. Um, and if the land isn't super productive, then you just have a liability, because then you have to maintain the land. And more importantly, you have to maintain the houses. And these houses are like huge and, constructed a long time ago. And
Yeah.
old, large houses are expensive to maintain. And there are expectations associated with your title. So you are supposed to maintain a staff, and you're supposed to entertain, and you have to attend balls in order to get your kids married off. And so they have, at this period, they had a lot of um, financial liabilities. And so, anyway, these were seen as like ideal matches. So this is a real thing that would happen. And then, of course, we know that essentially the importance of a title diminishes, and the importance of some kind of income increases as time goes on. But it's just interesting. I don't know. I always think about when you have one hit show, but especially like multiple shows dealing with a particular topic. What's going on right now in society that makes people interested in this period and this question of like class. And um I don't know. I mean, this is probably a stretch, but I think we're going through a similar transition economically, in that what used to be economically productive, what used to give people an advantage economically, is um I think I think I think the world will be more different in 10, 20 years than it was during the Industrial Revolution, where it was like, okay, Industrial Revolution took society from land is the most valuable thing you can own, the most productive thing you can own, to um, the means of production in terms of like factories, and access to labor was kind of, and government advantage. Like those were the three most profitable things you could own. And land, comparatively was devalued, especially land whose primary use was agriculture. I think similarly, AI is going to, you know, cause what people, and I think it's still like kind of true, right? Like what access to labor, access to skilled labor is basically the most profitable thing you could have, which is why all of the most, pretty much all of the most profitable jobs are created in like 7 or 8 superstar cities in the United States, because that's where you have access to um, skilled labor. But with AI, I think probably the most profitable thing you're going to be able to own will be intellectual property, models, data, algorithms. And I think it's going to similarly upend society.
Oh
So
yeah.
maybe that's part of why people are so interested in this transitory period. And then like, how does that change? I mean, we're already seeing like a shift from like the titans of capital to the, you know, tech CEOs. Um, how does that change who's considered in what class? It'll
Yeah.
be it'll be interesting.
That's another interesting thing about the tech area specifically. I forgot where I was. I think I was responding to another podcast short that had been posted, and it was a guy talking about cybersecurity and how like not having a traditional education is actually it's not really that important anymore. Like whether or not you have a college degree does not like, or at least necessarily show, or it's not an indication of how good you're going to be like working in the cybersecurity field, because like for anything involving coding, like even when I worked for corporations versus like now I work at a firm, but at corporations in web dev I was working alongside people who didn't have degrees, but they were insanely competent, because like now, I mean, it's for a mix of reasons, but yeah, like things like having college degrees not that big of a thing. With AI, I saw a thing on Twitter today where they were like, I think someone was making like a huge fuss about like, I think they called it like the hallucination rate or something. Basically, it was about how accurate, and like I think GPT-4 has that rate down to 3.5%. So they're getting insanely accurate. Google's like one of theirs was like 10% hallucination, the other one was 20. So they're having some issues, but like ChatGPT specifically has gotten to an insanely accurate point. And so yeah, I could definitely see a shift coming, like you're saying. But yeah, that's an interesting. I'd never thought about why the Gilded Age is like there's so much interest in the show, but that makes a lot of sense, like what you're saying.
Yeah, I think the two things that really interest me about media, I mean, there's a bunch, but two of them are like what is happening in society that makes people interested in particular stories and characters, and then also what is happening in the economics of media production and distribution that incentivizes certain kinds of media. And like one thing that is really interesting is I don't know, I haven't checked this and I don't even know how I would, but what I heard recently is that the way that creators are compensated for their television shows has changed due to streaming, and that the platforms have negotiated a structure where creators, and that includes like writers and actors and directors and a bunch of people, are compensated at a particular percentage for the first season of a show and a greater percentage for the second season and an even greater percentage for the third season, and I guess so on and so forth. And so that's a large reason why we're seeing such a smaller percentage of shows get picked up for second and third and so on seasons.
And
And just go ahead.
oh, sorry, I was just gonna say, and I wonder how that's changed since the strike, because I remember the writer's strike that just happened. One of the major points was uh, basically the like getting or changing how they were being compensated for streaming. I think there was some of it had to do with residuals, but a lot of the major key points this time around were about like their compensation for streaming services, particularly.
I mean, I would imagine so, since streaming is such a large percentage of how people are consuming these shows. But I think that's still essential. I believe the structure that disincentivizes future seasons is still in place, and so that's why you're seeing so many like limited series. And probably we will continue to see a lot of limited series as a result of this. And I hate this because the thing that I love about television is that when I get invested in a set of characters and a story, you know, with the movie, I only get to spend, at most 2.5 hours with those characters and with that story. But over a television show, I can spend, many more hours. The investment pays off more, it feels like. But with
Yeah.
at the same time, I do feel like a lot of shows do fall off in subsequent seasons, and you can always do a spin-off. But anyway, I just think the economics of the entertainment industry and how it impacts what gets made and how it gets made is super interesting.
There was a clip I saw earlier from, I think it was like, it's whatever College Humor is now. But it was like their game show where they have to ad lib stuff, and like the prompt was between two of the contestants was um, basically to do it was to have a job interview but have it have the same quality arc as Game of Thrones. And so it's like, okay, I see you worked here for, you were like a Humana, and then you were like the vice president of Blue Cross Blue Shield, and then it just says for the last couple of months you've been kicking dogs. It's like, God, that is so true. But also what you were saying, going back to a more serious point, um, yeah, that I never thought about the economics, but I remember for the longest time Netflix would start a new series and you get invested in it, and it's like they even had like a reputation for it. It was like either after season 2 or 3 shows would get killed off even if they were midway through an arc. Like you were never going to get past like 2, or if you were very lucky, 3 seasons. And yeah, that now that you're saying that makes a lot more sense why. But
Well, it's also rough because it's like future seasons are more expensive for the platforms, but less profitable probably because probably most of the time you're not picking up new viewers in season two, three, four. You're only dropping off. Like people watch season one, they'll watch part of season two. Um, I guess the exception would be like cult shows that kind of take a long time to build word of mouth. Um, but the problem is some things don't become cult favorites until 5, 10 years after they come out. And so,
yeah,
how does that work? I mean, you do have things that will, you'll have breaks of years between seasons. So that's always possible, but that's hard to do. People retire and get busy with other projects. And so, anyway, um, have you watched anything without me in the interim?
no, I've basically just been trying to catch up on tasks. I was just thinking of how, say, you were talking about cult shows. And so I was thinking about, it's like, yeah, sometimes it takes them a long time to, like, I'm thinking specifically Clone High, which we did. That was one thing that I forgot. We watched the first episode of the new season. And I don't know, like, it was good. Like, it held true to the original, but in a way, I kind of wish, now that there's actually a continuation of it, I kind of wish it just never came, because I feel like it would have been better in my head thinking of the possibilities. But now that it's actually been done, I don't know. Part of the magic is gone.
Yeah, that was interesting. So what was a 20-year cliffhanger?
Yeah, I mean, to HBO, yeah, it was one of the few things that HBO didn't kill. They bought 2 seasons of it, so it's getting a season 2 and 3, and they let them. It's a continuation from season 1. It's not a reset or a reboot. So yeah, there was literally 20 years. Like, I remember, basically, I found the show in high school. I was at a LAN party because I was a freaking nerd. But I remember one morning everyone else was asleep. It was like 5 a.m. and I was like going through everyone's shared drives, and totally did not watch a pirated copy of the season because that would be wrong. But yeah, and then nothing, because like by the time I watched it, it had already been long canceled. Because it turns out that when you put Gandhi in things in a not flattering depiction, it kind of upsets entire countries. that threatened to boycott your network. So yeah, it died for about 20 years. But I did like how they reintroduced Gandhi. Like they just had like Abe talking to him and then realizing he was just talking to a fire hydrant. Like they pretend that he was never there. Like I thought that was well handled, but yeah.
And you could only do that with an animated show, right? Because if it had actors, they would all be middle-aged.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you had a lot of money, you could do the weird de aging thing, and then like even now, like you can hear like changes in, um, like their voices to some degree. It's not extreme though. Like voices definitely hold up much longer than like yeah faces. And a lot of times de aging gets into uncanny valley.
Yeah, I don't know. My favorite one season show from the 90s, I know Clone High was 2003, but kind of similar era, is My So-Called Life. And Claire Danes is a middle-aged woman. Like you can't you can't give that a second season now. Uh though it would be really interesting to me to do like Angela Parker as a middle-aged woman, who does this character become?
Yeah, did they do something similar to the or
Angela Chase, sorry. Angela Chase. Don't come after me.
no, like they could do something like I haven't watched it, but like they did like the That 80s show or something where it basically picked up I think with a lot of the same characters later in
No, it
life.
was 90s, that
That
90s
90s show.
show.
And so like I guess you could do something that took into account the actual time between seasons. And like I guess it would be them introducing a new cast to retain the format or something. I don't know.
Yeah, well, my experience with that 90s show definitely doesn't make me want anyone to do that.
Oh yeah, I never watched any of it. I just like I heard about it. So yeah, I'm not vouching for its quality at all.
That was actually an arc in TV Tuesdays before we started RNC was I watched that 90s show because I love the 90s. I love 90s nostalgia.
Heck yeah.
But I had never really watched that 70s show. Like I'd seen like two episodes maybe in my life. And so I started to watch it and I'm just like, it was all references to that 70s show. And I was like, okay,
Uh
I cannot enjoy this without knowing the references. And so then I started watching that 70s show, like first episode, first season, like watching it through. And I was like, this is great. Like I understand why it was such a hit. It was really good. It definitely dropped off in season two. I think that's when I stopped watching. But then I went back to that 90s show and I'm like, yeah, this is still trash. Like,
uh that's
yeah,
unfortunate
I
to
mean,
hear.
maybe if I'd been like one of those true heads that, had watched all seasons of that 70s show, back in the day, like it would have been more of a nostalgia hit, but as a show, it was not super good.
That's unfortunate. Yeah, that was on my list, but yeah, I'm gonna take it off now. Cause yeah,
Yeah. Um, yeah, so speaking of the economics of streaming, my good friend is super, super excited about Britt Marling's new show. So Britt Marling was the writer, well, it was like Britt and Zal, I want to say, they're a writing team, writing directing team, and they are behind the OA, which got canceled after one season. And
yeah.
so her new show,
The OA, that's the one where the people got kidnapped.
I don't know, I've not seen it. I'm not sure.
I'm gonna look it up really quick while you're talking.
Oh, wait, no, I know. Okay, I remember from reading. The OA was a girl is deaf and then she disappears and reappears with the ability to hear and like other
Yeah,
stuff.
I think they brought it back for a second season. I want to say.
Maybe it was two seasons, but
But it died mid story. Jason Isaacs is particularly bitter about that because he knew the entire plot and keeps trying to get someone to renew it. But he does that with a lot of projects, so I don't know if that really says much.
So apparently someone like staged a hunger strike outside of Netflix. People were pretty insistent on more OA. But anyway, they have a new project and it airs Tuesday, I want to say. It's called A Murder at the End of the World. So I watched The East, which is another, I think this was like the first like funded film that this writing team, Britt Marling and her partner, created. And that was really interesting. And I also read Marling's essay for the New York Times about not wanting to play a strong female lead. And it was really interesting watching The East and then reading that essay. I had, so The East is about a woman who works for a company whose purpose is to identify and neutralize threats to major corporations. And so eco-terrorism is one of those kinds of threats that they are interested in identifying and neutralizing. And so she infiltrates a cell of eco-terrorists. And again, the show is full of spoilers, becomes like sympathetic to the cause.
Ah, that sounds really interesting.
It is interesting. It's well done. And it gave me a lot of thoughts and feelings about revolution and versus incremental change.
Yeah, I saw the
And
Twitter thread you created for that.
yeah, it got me tweeting.
Heck yeah.
And I think what I didn't like about the movie, what I liked about the movie is it was, it was well done and it was thought provoking. I think one part of it was really interesting where it's a scene where she is being shit tested by the cell, particularly by the leader of the cell. And he makes everyone wear a straight jacket to dinner. And then there's soup in front of everybody and a spoon in front of everybody, and tells the protagonist to eat first, that they're going to wait to eat until she eats. And to eat anyway, she uh, can figure out how to. So she like picks up the spoon with her mouth and dips it in the big bowl and then pours it into the little bowl and then like laps it up out of the little bowl. And then they're like, okay. And then they start eating. And what they do, the rest of the cell, is they put half of them put a spoon in their mouth and pick up some soup. And then they turn to the person next to them and that person eats out of the spoon. And then the same thing happens in the opposite direction. And it was very cringe for me because I'm like, it's just very unsubtle, right? Um,
That's what I was thinking while you were describing it.
it's very unsubtle, but at the same time, it's almost better because you would expect a group of anarchists squatting in an abandoned building who are eco-terrorists to be unsubtle, right? And to be cringe in the way that they do things.
Yeah.
Um, at the same and the other part that I thought was really cringe, besides the lack of subtlety, is the what irritates me about a lot of radical leftist organizing, let's say, activity, is that it's very trustafarian. It's a lot of people who come from money and come from privilege and like choose to act as if they didn't, like they don't. They live in, they like squat in abandoned buildings, but they know they could have a room in their parents' mansion anytime they need one.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it like perfectly illustrated the fact that these are able-bodied people who like put on straitjackets to eat perfectly illustrates that phenomenon, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that the same cringe applies. That's interesting and yeah.
And I think it would have been better. It's unclear to me whether the team that made this was pointing that out or whether this was an unintentional satirization of the Trustafarian phenomenon. And I think if it had been clear that it was self-parody, that, that's endearing, right? Like that's clever.
Yeah.
But unintentional self-parody is not the same. It's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Um,
I could see that.
so, but ultimately, where I think my biggest critique of the film is that if my friend hadn't told me that Britt Marling said, I create movies because I don't know how to fix the world. Like when I look at the world and I look at real problems, I get overwhelmed and upset. And so I make movies instead. Um, but if I hadn't heard that, then I would accuse the filmmakers of being like really naive because I'll give the film credit for it's not moralizing and clear cut in the way of like eco-terrorism works or eco-terrorism is right. If anything, it's definitely a critique of the means justify the ends, at least that kind of simplistic moral calculus. But it overstates how well eco-terrorism like does and can work even without making a clear-cut case for it. It's still like, for example, there's a section where they do what they call a jam, so it's like a prank but more serious, and then as a result this woman is on Fox News talking about the harms of a particular pharmaceutical. And she gets like 2 or 3 minutes of uninterrupted airtime to talk about how this drug has harmed her. And I'm like, this would never happen. Like,
No.
no one
No.
gets 2 or 3 minutes of uninterrupted airtime except like hosts, first of all. But second of all, there's no way like Fox News or MSNBC, who are all funded by drug companies, is going to give anyone uninterrupted airtime to talk about the harms of the drugs that they create. Like that, there's nothing you could do, anyone could do, no matter how smart or capable they are, to get that result. Like that's just not real.
I mean, I guess
And
if you're
so,
dressed like Donald Trump's empty podium, CNN will give you that airtime, but
right, right. So, yeah, anyway, but it gave me a lot of thoughts about like revolution versus incremental change and yeah, just I think the difficult thing is you can't know counterfactuals. So, in the absence of revolution, like if people hadn't done a terrorism, like if they had tried, or not that people aren't trying incremental change all the time, but if they had like tried in a different way, like what would have happened? You can't know. But anyway, so that's that.
it sounds like an interesting show, and we should definitely watch the new show, A Murder at the End of the World.
Yeah, for sure.
Looks like it
And read
come.
the essay. Oh, the other one thing I wanted to point out, which is in the Twitter thread, but now that we're here, I thought that was really interesting is Britt makes a really, I thought, astute comparison between the hero's journey and the male orgasm. And I thought about how, to me, revolution or terrorism is more like the male orgasm, where it's like build up, explosion, resolution, like linear and one and done, versus incremental change is to me more like, and not to be too gender essentialist, but on average, more like build up, resolve, build up, explosion, maybe resolve, more building up. It's like
Yeah,
it's yeah. So anyway,
it's a really
incremental.
good way to explain that. I never would have never thought about using that.
Thank you. I thought it was interesting. Anyway, read the essay, watch the show. We'll be watching it. And
I'm
yeah,
sure we'll have an episode on it soon.
I'm sure.
You got anything else?
No, not for now. Looking forward to being back and doing this IRL.
I am very much looking forward to seeing you in the very near future. Anyway, well, if that's it, I need to take our cat to the mall so we can go to Hot Topic. That's the one that's still on my list. But yeah, we'll be back next week with you IRL.